That amendment is defeated. I will then go to NDP 7. Go to Mr. Rankin. Mr. Rankin, please. NDP 7.
Yes, thanks, Chair. In a sense, this has a similar intention as that of the Green Party amendment, so it may not be acceptable, but I put it out as an amendment, again, to provide greater certainty. For greater certainty, the phrase other law in the subsection to which she spoke does not include any other act that expresses fundamental values such as the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, the Canadian Bill of Rights, the Canadian Human Rights Act, the Privacy Act, and the Official Languages Act, and the Access to Information Act. Chair, in the courts, all of these statutes have been called, in the case of the Charter, of course, a constitutional law, but the others have been considered quasi-constitutional in nature. They're part of our fundamental framework of laws in Canada. So there seems to be some ambiguity in Clause 4 about inconsistency between this Act, the Budget Implementation Act, and the provisions of any other law. And it does say that the agreement prevails to the extent of the inconsistency. Prevails over the Privacy Act? That can't be the case. It can't be the case. So this would simply clarify that and give Canadians some comfort that we're not selling the farm, selling our fundamental rights by passing a law of this sort.
Thank you. Further comment, Mr. Keddy?
Yep. Mr. Chairman, the provisions are unnecessary. The Charter applies where it applies. The Privacy Commissioner has given no indication that Part 5 is inconsistent with the Privacy Act. The motion is absolutely unduly vague and is not clear what fundamental values is intended to mean or what fundamental values mean. And similarly, the IGA and the implementing legislation do not result in any kind of general override of official languages or Access to Information Act. So, you know, it doesn't, the Charter applies where it applies, and the Privacy Commissioner has looked at this and given us a green light. So where's this information coming from?
Okay, thank you. I have Mr. Cullen.
I'm going to check back in with our Privacy Commissioner about them having given this agreement a green light. I think serious concerns were raised by that same Privacy Commissioner, so green light might be an exaggeration of the testimony that we heard. My question through you, Chair, to the officials, just with respect to, we had some conversation earlier about the seeking advice from the Justice Department, a normal practice, a required practice under our laws. This ambiguity that Mr. Rankin seeks to clarify through this amendment as to which supersedes which, if there's a conflict. And one can, I don't think it's fantasy to imagine a potential conflict between an intergovernmental agreement and the sharing of financial information and someone raising a concern around privacy. I think that's a natural potential legal consequence. Did the Department seek out any clarification from Justice with respect to these specific acts, in particularly the Privacy Act or the Access to Information Act?
Well, I'm sorry, the question started off by referring
which
to...
Which has supremacy?
Well, the constitutional question or other matters?
If there's a conflict between the two, an agreement we've signed, a tax treaty that we've signed under this provision, and the Privacy Act or the Access to Information Act, did the Department seek any legal advice as to which supersedes which when in direct conflict one with the other?
I'll try to answer your question as well as I'm able. With respect to constitutional matters, I think we said earlier that the Department of Justice, the Minister of Justice, is charged with reviewing legislation and advising Parliament if there's the concern that the legislation is not constitutional. With respect to the Privacy Act, you've heard, I believe, from the Interim Privacy Commissioner on that and obtained her views. With respect to other matters such as access to information, I'm not aware of that question having been specifically asked.
So let me take you back. I am aware of her views. The specific question you said, at least as far as you know, around the Access to Information Act, whether that legal opinion was sought through the Justice Department. It's a simple question, but perhaps it's a complicated question in the sense that when in conflict, we can't foresee what the courts will rule, but all I'm asking is, was an opinion sought from Justice, where Justice said clearly such an intergovernmental agreement, the Privacy Act is dominant. It will, in cases, be interpreted as superseding that of a tax treaty agreement with a foreign nation. Was that advice sought?
Well, with respect to the Privacy Act, it is, as I've already said, that we kept the Privacy Commissioner informed, and I think the way I'd expressed it before is I'm not aware that the Privacy Commissioner actually, or the Privacy Office will bless legislation per se, but they offer comments. You've had the Interim Privacy Commissioner here, and my understanding is that she did not raise issues. She thought that there was, or at least I'd understood there not to be a conflict.
So the question I asked was a legal opinion sought from your department through the Justice Department as to which holds supremacy under Canadian law, this intergovernmental agreement with respect to the privacy of Canadians or the Privacy Act? I just want to know if an opinion was sought, and you can say I don't know, or you can say one was sought and I won't tell you, but I just want to know if you went to Justice and asked.
I'm not aware of an opinion from Justice having been sought on the Privacy Act question. That was dealt with through the Privacy Commissioner.
Now, and just to be clear for the record, when we asked both you and the Privacy Commissioner, there was conversations between your offices, but there wasn't any acknowledgement of seeking, as Mr. Keddy talked about, a green light. There was never a moment where Finance sat down with the Privacy Commissioner and said, we want your endorsement of this, or we want to know that this is in line with the Privacy Act stipulations. There's one thing in terms of consultation. Consultation can mean what it simply means by definition. You kept her informed. Whether there was condoning of the provisions in this act and whether that we're going to see conflict. Our concern is this, specifically, and I think what this amendment, NDP 7, seeks to do is to put into plain legal text so that there's no doubt and that it doesn't necessarily need that expensive legal process to clarify this later, which is, I think, what's going to happen under the bill as it's written, that when in conflict, the Charter of Rights, the Bill of Rights, the Human Rights Act, the Privacy Act, Official Languages, and Access to Information Acts all will supersede this intergovernmental agreement. So if that's what the amendment says, that's what this amendment today proposes, does that threaten any of the fundamental DNA of the intergovernmental agreement we have with the United States under your view?
I haven't considered all those points, and in fact, it's not for me to consider. The Department of Justice has the responsibility, the standing responsibility for constitutional matters. The privacy question was obviously of interest to us because of the issues that FATCA itself raised, so those were discussed with the Privacy Office, and we thought we've overcome them. The other issues, I'm not aware.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Cullen. Go to Mr. Rankin.
Just for clarification, Mr. Unwine.
Sorry?
Sir, I just wanted to, you said to my colleague that you did not seek a legal opinion from the Department of Justice on the Privacy Act implications of this agreement or this law. Have I got that correct? You didn't ask the Department of Justice for a legal opinion. Did you ask any outside counsel for a legal opinion in that regard?
Please. No, we did not ask any outside counsel for advice.
And you conferred with the Privacy Commissioner, but you've testified that they don't give advance tax rulings, they don't give advance privacy rulings, so you don't have anything to go on from her either.
Well, we have her testimony before you, I think, in an exchange with you about the view that it has a higher standing than ordinary law, if you will.
But when we had a discussion, you may recall, sir, when you were here, we talked about this, and I was left unclear about just which law would prevail in the event of a conflict. And the government has defended the use of the CRA as opposed to simply, as in other IGAs in other countries, simply allowing the information to flow from our banks to the IRS. We interposed the CRA precisely because the Privacy Act would give us some protections. But now you're saying, it may be the case that the Privacy Act will not prevail. And that's why we're seeking clarification to that extent. And so that would appear to be a very reasonable amendment. It would seem to do what the government has said is one of the reasons we put the CRA in the middle in the first place.
And to that, I think that what I had said earlier and sort of amplified or perhaps more authoritatively spoken to by the Privacy Commissioner is that there doesn't appear to be a conflict to overcome.
One of the things that's in our proposed amendment, Chair, is the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. I'd like to read to you from Mr. Peter Hogg, who the government, you'll recall, consulted on the Nadon appointment recently and obviously thinks of him as an important constitutional scholar. And he writes as follows. In my opinion, the procedures mandated by the IGA are discriminatory in a way that would not withstand charter scrutiny. These procedures effectively treat individuals differently and adversely based on immutable personal characteristics, specifically citizenship. If Parliament were to enact legislation authorizing and permitting this type of differential and adverse treatment, the legislation would contravene the equality provision in Section 15 of the Charter, close quote. That is why we seek clarity that the Charter of Rights would prevail. That is one of the acts that we've asked be addressed in our proposed amendment. That's the reason for the amendment.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Renault, I just want to clarify, I mean, how many of these tax treaties have you worked on over the years?
Oh, myself personally?
Yeah.
I couldn't say. There's 90